Hello, good morning, and welcome to another, yet another segment of News Express, exclusively brought to you by Business AM, Nigeria's fastest growing financial and business newspaper. It's a new week, and with the new week comes interesting headlines hitting the pages of Business AM. And I'll take you through that one real quick while I bring in Mr. Philip Isakwa to shed more light on the headlines. Now, the very first headline on the cover page: running from banks, Nigerians face crisis with digital loan apps. Running from banks, Nigerians face crisis with digital loan apps. Bullet headlines just underneath: high interest rates, reputation damage, tedious loan requirements from traditional banks now a turn-off to Nigerians. Harsh, unbearable economic realities raising loan demand. All right, that one on page 2, it continues. And moving on to the second headline there: duping citizens, Nigeria shares 7.23 trillion naira, but comes out worse off in 2020 with broken economic system, insincere governance. The bullet points there say federal government receives 3.04 trillion naira, state and local governments 4.18 trillion naira. Federal government claims 10.5 million people lifted out of poverty, whereas the World Bank is saying 7 million in extreme poverty. Okay, Mr. Philip is going to tell us how this is the case. And then we have the very last bullet point there on the second headline: unemployment soared 33.3%, inflation 18%. Not good news at all, but what can we do? The summary section, we have this one here: Anambra's Lagos economy potential, page 5. The finance and investment section, not in on global tech giant tax. What's that about? Check it out on page 10. FMN comes in strong, 772 billion naira. That one's on page 23. And I'll move over to the commodities and agri section, where we have no export for Nigerian vegetables on page 26 of Business AM. Of course, now I'm going to bring in Mr. Philip Isakwa. Good morning, Mr. Philip. Thank you so much for being here with me this morning.
Good morning, Rachel. Nice to be here.
All right, so let's just jump right on the second headline there, talking about our current economic situation, Mr. Philip. We've said this on and on and on. But what more can you tell us about the 7.23 trillion naira? And why is the federal government saying one thing? We, the citizens, we are seeing one thing, and then the World Bank, they are seeing another thing. What's going on?
Yes, the whole thing is about revenue end. So you have every month they go to Abuja, revenues that are accrued from different sources: petroleum tax, income tax, VAT, non-oil exports, and so on and so forth. So they share this amount of money. But at the end of the year, even though when you go through from month to month, from during the year, you find complaints going all over the place. So at the end of the year, everything is totaled, and what we're seeing is that for 2020, there was actually some good money made, 7.23 trillion. Of course, you can look at the population and look at the size of Nigeria, look at the size of the economy and say, well, this isn't an awful lot of money, but then there is some money being made. But you now need to say, how is this translating in terms of impact on the citizens, So because this money, so when you make this money, you expect that the money ought to reflect on the lives of the people that the government is managing. So you have a federal government, you have a state government system, you have local government as well. And then they say, well, in 2020, you had 3.4 trillion naira going to the federal government, 3.04 trillion naira to the federal government, and then the states and local governments across the federation, 36 states, and then 774 local government, all receiving 4.18 trillion. Now you expect that. I'd already told us that they have a 10-year plan, to lift 100 million people out of poverty, And then they came up to say, well, we have done 10.5 of that, in the first year. Apparently calculating, if you did 10 million every year, you probably would get your 100 million in 10 years, So they put together a number, we actually did more than we thought we would do. So we've done 10.5 million, lifted 10.5 million people out of poverty, but the numbers aren't adding up. You have people who are debating where are these 10.5 billion people, and then I spoke to some people over the weekend, regarding this number, and they were saying, well, 10.5 billion people out, even if it were true, you have 10.5 billion people in a population of say 200 or even 200 plus million people. That doesn't even make any yes, so but and then the World Bank comes up with this report, it does not talk about poverty, it talks about extreme poverty, so that you can multiply it by 2 or 3, and giving you, if you say extreme poverty, it means that multiply that by 2, you probably have 14, or multiply by 3, you have 21 million people in poverty. You understand? So it doesn't really stack up the numbers that the government gave. Unemployment went as high as 33.3% and closed at 18%. So the numbers, from what we're seeing that have come out, suggest that there is really a challenge, and it appears as if money is being earned, and then the citizens, you expect that the lives of the citizens will be touched by the huge amount of money that we're talking about. But, in 2020, Nigeria came worse off, despite this amount that they go to Abuja every month to share, But it's also about how when you look across the states, leave Abuja, leave Lagos, and perhaps maybe Port Harcourt, maybe Kano, and then look at the other states where you have the Nigerian citizens, and you find that they are being dealt. I mean, the story is saying that, well, citizens are being duped. This money that is being collected is not reflecting in terms of touching their lives and making their lives better. So that's really the cruise of the story. So much money being made when you share it across. The different states that take a lot of money, top earning states, for instance, subnationals. Lagos earns quite a lot of money. Recently listed among the most unlivable cities in the world. Despite the huge amount of money they make, Lagos State makes, but it's still regarded as one of the most unlivable cities in the world. You have. So, for instance, it got to 99.57 billion in 2020. Despite that, you don't have so much to show in terms of we're talking about individuals now. Whether you talk about healthcare, you talk about education, you talk about transportation, there is still a lot of suffering, in terms of what you see. If you go to Delta State that got the second highest, 247.25 billion, or you go to Akwa Ibom, again an oil producing state with 212.35 billion. Or go to Rivers, 198.87 billion, and then you begin to ask the question, Kano made collected 174.93 billion. You expect to see tangible, when we say tangibles, we talk about the lives of the people, perhaps the living standard, and that's what the story is about, talking about this, that this amount of money that is being shared, is not really touching the lives of the people.
Right. Okay, let's move over to the PIB headlines now on page 20 and on page 25. And there's, after 12 years, we are seeing that this bill has finally been passed. But let's look at the existing law and, something else that's in this new one that's just been passed. Now, the existing laws states that nothing stops an entity from operating in more than one sector for example, the upstream, the midstream, or the downstream sectors. But with the introduction of the PIB, a company shall not be involved in more than one stream of petroleum operation and would have to register separate companies for each stream of petroleum operations. Does this not complicate things for investors who have large capital to invest in different sectors? And looking at the headline on page 12, we are seeing NATO talking about how much we're going to be getting back in investment once this is fully implemented.
Yes, you see, governance of the sector has always been a problem. Some experts were talking. I mean, people raise the concern that I've just raised now. In an expert group that I belong to, we're talking about creating multiple levels of governance structure.
Yeah.
And one expert said, well, you can look at it that way, but the industry is such a complicated one, that is it complicated the right word, such a technical one, that you need some governance. If you lump things together, the tendency is to have confusion. Of course, we're coming from a confused situation. The opaqueness of the industry has been one that has been confounding even to those of us junior hacks, that try to get information in terms of how this one particular aspect of the sector operates, and then another aspect of the sector. Now you lump things up. The tendency is to, because the key thing, one of the major targets, to be quite honest, is the what's it called, the fiscal regime, to ensure that Nigeria actually gets enough, from is able to extract enough, from having crude oil, and having an energy sector that is crude oil plays a major part in, So the separation is for clarity. It allows for clarity. It allows for governance institutions. So one company, who that can hide some things under an umbrella. What's it called? Omnibus institution. Can then be separated in such a way that they can be easily monitored, they can be easily followed in terms of government getting what is supposed to come to them by way of revenue. So you have somebody operating in the downstream, upstream, or midstream, that has an what's it called, an omnibus kind of organization, and can move one thing from the other. You can move from one aspect to the other, and then cover things up in such a way that government might not be able to understand and be able to extract a great dividend from managing this the system as a whole. So that would basically be it. If you were to look at so for a long time, 12 years, you've had this back and forth situation in terms of what the laws are to govern the industry. Now you have it. In those 12 years, you had a lot of investment decisions were put on hold from an industry.
Right.
You need to understand how you are going to make that 5 naira. So because there was no clear understanding, about how that 5 naira was going to be made, then you had people holding back their investment and looking at other places, Mozambique, what's it called, Angola, and even the new ones that are coming up around and about us in Nigeria,
right.
So that is something that has now become clearner, so the investors will now say, okay, this is what I'm going to make. I'm not assured about this earnings, this is how much I'm going to invest, and then so the clarity is there, and it becomes clearer for them, and I think the industry will move forward.
Right. I'm afraid I'll have to let you go now, Mr. Philip. But for our readers out there, I think you might find other very interesting headlines on Business AM this morning. You can check out the one on page 22, the finance and investment banks versus fintech firms. First to blink. Here's what analysts think. Check out that one too. Thank you so much, Mr. Philip, for joining me this morning. We'll see how all the stories develop. The PIB is still on paper. We'll see all the implementations and how it's going to move the sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Rich.
All right, and that was Philip Isakba, the publisher, Business AM, Nigeria's fastest growing financial and business newspaper.